to plan them alongside of each other. So I'm going to zero in on just the top with you and look at just that biblical integration lesson objective. So the idea is to write, to come up, to use your lesson objective, to find a biblical principle, and then to put them together and have that be what drives your lesson. When you've got a biblical principle and a lesson objective together, that you put them together into that very long little orange box. So I have a ton of examples for you because I feel like that's how I unpack the most. So I'm just going to look at a bunch of different examples with you. So these come from all different grade levels and all different subject areas. So some of them will be like, oh, I can write that in my lesson book, and some of them will be like, clearly that's from high school. So this lesson objective was, students will explain how cocaine affects the brain. The biblical principle is that the body is a temple. Man is made to be sober and controlled by the Spirit. You put them together. Students will explain how cocaine affects the brain and prevents us from being sober or controlled by the Spirit. Students will be able to convert weights. Man is to use accurate weights and measures. Students will understand that they are to and will be able to convert weights and measures accurately. I really like this one because I feel like so much of our math biblical integration comes back to God is creative and the world is orderly. And that's always where I get stuck in math, is saying like, and everything has order and logic and purpose. But this one really got down to that piece of like, why it matters. You need to be able to convert weights, not because you're going to be a chemist, but because God says He wants you to be able to do that accurately and fairly in your life. So whether or not you're going into that field, you might need that someday, because God asked us to be accurate and to be truthful. Another one, students will be able to identify how the choices of the hero lead to corresponding consequences. That is a major, we've seen that in Journeys already, that is one of those learning targets in reading that comes up over and over and over. The biblical principle is that man is made in the image of God and can do good, but has a sin nature which causes him to do bad. You reap what you sow. If you put them together, students will be able to identify how the state of man leads the hero to make certain choices which have corresponding consequences. Kind of like what Crystal was just saying with that character. Based on what they do, what does that show you about all people, that state of man? What my hero does here, what is it in human nature that led him or her to make those choices that have those consequences? Students will be able to identify the major themes and messages in the chapter. The biblical principle, themes of books can either reveal truth or untruths. Students will be able to identify, put them together, students will be able to identify whether the major themes and messages of the chapter reveal the truth or not. This has been really helpful. This idea has been really helpful for me with Journeys. Journeys has been a struggle for me because I was a literature major and I like long stories and character development, and I missed that with my kids. So it's been hard for me to switch from those long, deep stories to kind of moving through a different one every week. But the beauty of it is that every week we have a different theme and a different message. In each story, every week we have a different opportunity. And so I've had a different opportunity every week to look with my kids at a story, not maybe as long and deep as I would like to, but to look at these different stories and say, what is the author trying to say here? Is that theme godly? Is that message godly? Or is it not? And then really talking with them about that capital T truth or an untruth. The idea that that there is absolute truth. That's a theme, or not a theme, a fact that our kids really struggle with in the world that they're growing up in. They've heard over and over and over, what's true for you isn't necessarily true for me. Well, what I think is, or that's just not true for me. They're bombarded with that. So I think it's imperative that we teach our kids, there is absolute truth. And the absolute truth is God's truth. And your truth without His truth is not complete. So I feel like really, really dissecting each one of those Journeys passages is really key. So what I've been doing is they have, within the teacher text, when you open up to the first page of the story, it has a little essential question, right? And so I post the essential question each week, and then I either tweak the question, I basically do this. I figure out what the biblical principle is, or I rewrite the question with an extra God piece. Like there was one story that we had where the question was, how can we help our community, or something like that. And I said, okay, well, yeah, how can we help our community? But as a Christian, how should you help your community? So just kind of adding in tiny little biblical principles. Sometimes I'll write that as the essential question. Sometimes we'll have a discussion about whether or not the story proposes a Christian message or a godly message or not. So that's one way that I've kind of approached journeys. Our next one says, Christians will compare and contrast Hinduism and Christianity. The biblical principles, different religions can contain elements of truth and untruths. This is another thing that we talked about last time. Nobody believes something that's all the way false, right? We all have a moral conscience, right? So people believe things that have twisted truth, right? People don't believe things that are 1,000% false. We believe things that have some little bit of truth that's been twisted around. And so we really do our students a disservice when we don't teach them that, when we don't teach them like there's something, when we don't teach them to dissect something and see the part that's true and see the part that's false also, we teach them to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater all the time. And that can be dangerous when you get older and you start seeing different things, and it can be really, really confusing. So I feel like it's really, really imperative that we teach our kids to look at what is true within Hinduism and what is not true within Hinduism and compare it with what's true within Christianity. So teaching our kids to think a little bit deeper than that's all wrong and this is all good. Teaching them to see, no, the problem is really not true and false. The problem is really true and twisted true. You know what I mean? False stands out. Twisted truth is sneaky.
Amen.
So another one, students will compare and contrast human rights and civil rights. The biblical principle, this is one of my favorites. Kids know when they look at human rights and civil rights issues, they know something's wrong, right? When they look at different issues, they look at something and they say, I don't really like that, but I don't really know why. You know, and you have these discussions with kids where they're like, I don't know, it's just wrong. And so it's really exciting to start giving them words about why it's wrong. So that's where your biblical principles come in. Human rights and civil rights issues are right or wrong because man is made in the image of God and has inherent value and worth. And when kids can say, people shouldn't treat each other like that because people are made in the image of God and have value and worth, there's a whole lot more reward than, oh, that's just wrong and I don't like it, right?
It's not nice.
So, yeah, it's not very nice.
Yeah, it's the first grade.
We were watching a movie with my sister once on the French Revolution, and it was one of those things where it was like a family movie that we hadn't realized that there was the guillotine in the beginning. Right? And so she's sitting there, she's like, what's happening? And we explain, like, okay, well, the poor people are cutting off the rich people's heads. And my sister says, that's just not very nice. And my sister, who was just 2 years older, goes, geez, Emma, like, oh my gosh, there's way deeper than not very nice. It was a hilarious little family moment. So when you put these together, you can get beyond just comparing and contrasting human rights and saying, students will compare and contrast the inherent rights man should have as special creations in the image of God with the additional rights established by civil government. So looking at what are the rights that are given to you by God and what are the rights that are given to you by your government. And that's a really fascinating question to get into in your government classes. Students will identify the layers and characteristics of Earth's atmosphere. The biblical principle is God designed the different layers of the atmosphere for protection and life on Earth. Put them together. Students will identify how God designed the layers of the Earth's atmosphere with specific characteristics in order for life to exist on Earth. Students will evaluate and determine whether communism or a republic is a more effective form of government. The biblical principle, God was designed to use the standard of man to serve the people. Man is made in the image of God and can do good, but is fallen and will sin. So when you put them together, we've got students will evaluate and determine whether communism or a republic is a more effective form of government for applying the standard of God to serve the people who are made in the image of God, but have sinful natures. I want to stop here for a second and say that I would never put this on my board, right? Because kids would be like reeling, what in the world are they supposed to do with this, right? So this is the kind of thing where I would write this into my book or I would write it into my questions, but I'm not necessarily going to write that whole piece up on the board because that would be crazy. So we had a discussion on this, and it was before I saw this kind of put together as nicely as it is. I had written my own clumsy little objective, and we had this conversation of what is the best type of government, which was a totally cruel question to ask 6th graders, but they had fun with it. And one of my kids eventually got to I don't really think God cares as long as whoever is leading is doing it how God would. Or I don't really think that it matters as long as that person is doing it with God. Which was a great first step. Like, yeah, that is what God cares about. God cares about you leading in the way that He would. But this one takes it to a whole deeper level of, okay, well, which one is going to kind of set us up for success? What is going to be a more effective way? So then I wanted to give you some time to put these together. So I wanted to give you, you've got this lesson in front of you, and I wanted you to start off with, you've already got lesson objectives, I would imagine. Look at some biblical principles and see how you can rewrite and put them together. So you actually have, you have a page in your packet that has a whole bunch of boxes for you to kind of fill out. So one of your yellow pages, maybe the last one. And it looks like, it looks like this. So you've got lesson objectives, biblically integrated, and then I wrote down here, this is where the biblical integration posters, that purple page with the posters, that's what really, really helped me. And friends around me helped me a whole lot. When I write down my lesson objective, have somebody help you find that biblical principle, and then put it together. So I'm going to give you maybe 15 or 20 minutes to kind of start unpacking
My
those.
question is, this page is not prior to the one of the boxes we were given.
No, this one, these boxes are really